Bore da. If I was to ask you this morning, what do you think the most famous or well-known verse in the Old Testament is? I wonder how many of you would say Psalm 23 and verse 1, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." I would imagine that somewhere would find itself in the top 10 of Old Testament favorite or well-known verses. Moving into the New Testament, if I was to ask you what you think the most famous verse in the whole of the New Testament would be, I'm sure that many of you would answer with the words of Jesus, "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life." John 3:16. If I was a betting man, I would be willing to stake my bet on John 3:16, not only being among the top 10 verses of the New Testament, but probably number one. The number one hit, "For God so loved the world." This verse tells us almost everything that we need to know about the love of God. It encapsulates the whole concept of the greatness of God's love in one particular verse. Let me share 4 things with you this morning. Things probably you have heard preachers preach umpteen times about this particular verse. First of all, what does it tell us about the love of God? First of all, it shares with us the scope of his love. For God so loved the world. And the scope of God's love is so much bigger than ours. You see, the scope of our love includes probably a handful of individuals. There are only a few people that we can look in the eye and say, "I love you." We have a lot of friends that we like and that we care for, but few individuals that we can actually say, "Listen, I love you." But the scope of God's love is so vast that he loves the whole world. And it was a world, remember, of sinners, of those who rebelled against him. You see, our scope of love goes towards those who are lovable in our eyes and those who love us. But the scope of God's love is so vast. He loves a world of sinners and rebels. And then in this particular verse we have the measure of his love. That he gave his one and only Son. Here is a love that came from heaven to earth in order to die for our sins. We see real love, says the Apostle John, not in the fact that we love God, but that he loved us and sent his Son to make personal atonement for our sins. What measure is this love that God demonstrates his love for us in this, that while we were sinners, Christ died for us? This is beyond our comprehension. Could we ever give our child as a sacrifice in order to save those who despise us? It's beyond our comprehension. Yet this is the vastness of the love of God. Its measure, he gave his one and only Son. And then in this particular verse, we find the invitation of love, that whosoever believes. We cannot imagine this either. We could only consider inviting people to share our love who we think are lovable and would love us in return. But here God, in his love, gives an invitation to the most vile, the most wretched of sinners. Think of the Apostle Paul, the greatest persecutor of the Christian church, and yet God's love came out in an invitation to him, and thank God that the Apostle Paul found grace to respond to the love of God. And we have so many of his writings which has encouraged us and edified us today as Christians. The invitation that whosoever. And then think of the provision that is in this love. Shall not perish, but have everlasting life. Would we ever consider giving the best that we have for those who have rebelled against us? No way. And yet this is what God does in grace. He brings rebels to himself and he gives them the best that he has. He opens the gateway of heaven and invites us in. Thank God this morning that God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. And if by any chance this morning you're listening and you haven't received something, responded to the love of Christ, why not do so today and become a believer? Listen to Wade Robinson. He said, loved with everlasting love, led by grace that love to know, spirit breathing from above, thou hast taught me it is so. Oh, this full and perfect peace, oh, this transport all divine, in a love that cannot cease. I am his and he is mine. God so loved the world, and in the world, you and I. God bless you.